So this is section 2 of podcast launch from XYZ Media. In section 1, we talked a lot about pretty much dialing in your idea and creating that relentless attitude within yourself to pretty much not give up on this podcast. So in this section, we're going to get a little bit more in the weeds of the strategy and really establish the format for your podcast. I recently came across this blog or infographic, so to say, of breaking down all the different types of podcasts, and it basically broke down the pros and cons of each of these formats that podcasts can do. And so I really wanted to bring it up. So you can see here, this is the infographic I was discussing, and what I love about it, it's very visually appealing, and it can drive you through this. So it talks about there's 8 types of podcasts. Interview podcast, a pro is a great way to provide a range of opinions and viewpoints. Con can require quite a bit amount of research. So it kind of gets in the weeds of each of these. Conversational podcasts, 2 podcast hosts on a regular basis, entertaining conversations about specific themes and topics, similar to a radio show. Good chemistry is required for the quality of a show. So again, each of these are really great. I could keep going down these. Some of these aren't great for what most of us are going to be talking about, like theatrical podcasts may not be great for video. For example, Marvel does a lot of different podcasts. I know I listened to one that was about the Wolverine a couple years ago. That wouldn't translate to video because you just have somebody voice reading Wolverine, when that would be better as a TV show or a movie. So the main ones we're going to be discussing are the interview podcasts, the conversational podcasts, monologue podcasts, which are all about solo episodes, storytelling or investigative podcasts, roundtable podcasts, and possibly hybrid podcasts that can maybe do a little bit of everything. But honestly, I wouldn't do hybrid until you've really dialed in a community, and so you can kind of jump around and experiment, might work better. I would pick one of the ones I just mentioned. So one of the ones I discussed as an example in the previous section was the young entrepreneur wanting to welcome in his peers and go along this journey and document it through his podcast of establishing his business and how to be successful. Monologue wouldn't work because he doesn't have the expertise, right? Conversational, I don't know if him having constant conversations with the same person, such as a co-host, is really going to grow his expertise. So what I would recommend is doing an interview podcast, interviewing other people in his field that's going to educate him and his listeners to do a better job at building his business and learn a lot more. The next example was the retired politician that wants to reveal kind of what's going on behind the scenes and kind of target people who don't really care about politics. Then what I would do, if we jump to the blog here, I would actually suggest to do something like a monologue podcast, because he doesn't so much need to be discussing these topics with anybody, because he knows what's going on, and he can kind of talk about news reports and possibly get some really good viral clips of him saying some pretty erratic stuff to get young people and people who don't care to really pay attention. And the last example was the ultra sports fan that wants to create a community for other people who don't have the time to pay attention to what's going on in the sport or around that sports team. I would suggest doing something like a conversational podcast. And even though they're going to be talking about new events and stuff like that, you also want your personality to be the driver of the community. So having a consistent flow of yourself and maybe a co-host that have these opinions that people can align with, or at least enjoy listening to, is going to be really important. Now, a couple ones that we probably didn't talk about too much is probably like storytelling and investigative podcasts. This is perfect for true crime, historical ones that maybe you want to reveal what's going on, what happened in like the Wars of Napoleon or something like that. This is very similar to a conversational one where it's probably going to be a consistent flow of who's talking about it. The subject matter is very specific to what you're discussing in that episode, which makes it a little bit different. It's not so much an ebb and flow of a conversation. It's very different to getting to a point A to point B, but that consistent flow of your personality is probably also going to be a little important in that one. And then the other one I didn't discuss was Roundtable, which is a big group of people that kind of can interweave what's going on. You'll have topics very similar to conversation, but again, it's just a little bit bigger. A lot of people think when they want to start a podcast, let's get as many people on it as possible. Don't do that. Please do not do that. Roundtable podcasts take the stress of one person, splitting the workload among a number of different people. You're right. That's probably why you want to add as many people in. Getting different opinions could be really entertaining. These can get long running. A lot of in-jokes segments can feel unwelcoming for new listeners. And from a producer standpoint, editing these are a nightmare because everyone wants to talk over each other, especially if you're a newer podcast. If you wanted to go down this road, I start as a conversation with maybe 1 or 2 people and slowly add more people once you get really good at kind of driving where the conversation is going to go, and the people coming on have an awareness that other people are talking, let them finish their thoughts, and then move on to the next one. So I hope these exercises kind of made you think about what type of format is going to fit in your podcast. I would highly advise you to go research some of the most successful podcasts in each of these realms. For example, if you want to research any interview podcasts that are doing really, really well, obviously start with Joe Rogan. He does an amazing job interviewing other people and getting their insights. Diary of a CEO is also an amazing podcast for that. If you want a conversational podcast to really look into, TMG, as crazy as they are, that they have done an amazing job of building a podcast around their personalities, and it's just them two talking every time. They do add a guest in here and there. Or the Toast is also another great one in the same lines. And if you want to look at Monologue, I also think that this one could pretty much always be a hybrid. Doing a monologue episode every week can be really difficult, but you got a lot of expertise in this. So you being on camera and discussing what you know is very important. I think interweaving it with a conversation or an interview, maybe half the time, is also going to be really beneficial. So podcasts like The Game with Alex Hormozy or the Gary Vee audio experience, stuff like that, where these people can discuss what they've done successfully and their expertise, but they also have conversations at times with other people that also can maybe share their expertise with them, but also increase knowledge altogether. So that concludes the second section. I will include that link to that blog post. I absolutely recommend you to go through it, challenge yourself, and then also to look at successful podcasts alongside each of these types of formats to kind of give you some long-term game on how you want to approach developing your podcast and stuff like that. So again, thank you, and I'll see you in the next one.